Tim used to love flying. He was a young Navy pilot during the Second World War. After the war ended, he and a few friends from the Navy got a job flying in the South Pacific. Tim began to feel more at home after about a month of living on the island. One morning, he was assigned a solo mission to deliver parcels to a government official on another island. The flight to that island should take approximately 2 hours. Tim prepared a small single-engine plane. It was an old plane left over from the war and looked like it had been heavily used. He fueled up for the flight and took off into the clear blue sky. It was a calm day in the South Pacific with a few scattered clouds. The weather was perfect for flying. Tim felt excited and free as he soared above the crystal-clear ocean. After an hour of flying, Tim noticed the gauge showing the aircraft running low on fuel. He checked his instrument panel and thought the gauge may have malfunctioned as the fuel tanks were full before taking off. He carefully read through the aircraft checklist. Maybe there's a leak in one of the tanks, he thought. Suddenly, the engine was spewing smoke. Then, a cranking noise followed. Tim scanned the ocean below and saw a small, remote island off in the distance. He was calm but knew he needed to land quickly. He had no other choice. He steered the plane towards the island, made an emergency call on the radio, and prayed that he would make it. As he got closer, he saw that the island was covered with thick jungle and had a small beach. The engine's clanking got worse, and the plane began to lose altitude. The island was still far away, so it's unlikely the plane would make it all the way to that beach. With every second getting closer to the water, Tim gripped the controls tightly and prepared to ditch the plane. With great flying skills, he managed to gently skim across the surface of the water, creating very little force upon impact. Tim let go of the flight controls when he felt the plane floating, but he wasn't out of danger yet, as the water began to fill the cockpit. Tim quickly got out and put on his life vest. He pulled out a crate in the back seat filled with supplies. The floatable crate contained survival gear such as flare guns, a flashlight with batteries, dried food, and drinking water. He exited the plane, put on the life vest, and headed to the island. Holding onto the crate, Tim looked back periodically at his damaged plane. It got smaller by the second until it eventually disappeared. After what seemed like several hours, Tim finally reached the shore on a little stretch of white sand. He lay there on the beach and gazed at the view, feeling tired and isolated. The jungle was dense and mysterious. He was curious and wanted to explore the island. Tim opened the crate that washed up with him on the shore and put some supplies in his bag. The sounds of the jungle were loud and unfamiliar. Birds chirped, insects buzzed, and leaves rustled in the wind. Tim came upon a couple of wooden boats not far from the beach. He was excited to see a sign of life on this remote island. He kept walking up the hill on a trail, trying to stay alert. After a while, he stumbled upon a small village hidden deep in the jungle. Smoke rose from a fire in the center of the village. Surrounding the fire are thatched roof huts made of wood and leaves. Tim felt a mix of relief and fear. He hoped the villagers would give him shelter until rescuers came looking for him, but he also worried about how they would react to a stranger. He decided not to approach the villagers yet, but to watch them for a while instead. Through his binoculars, he could see children running around and playing. A few women were grilling fish on the fire. Several men were sitting around having conversations, drinking from wooden cups, and some were sleeping on hammocks. The villagers wore very little clothing. All were made of natural materials from animal skin to leaves. They looked happy and relaxed. Tim was sure he was hidden from sight behind a large tree. Suddenly, he collapsed onto the ground. An arrow had pierced through his hair and struck the tree where he was hiding. He lifted his head and saw two village men running up to him. Their faces were stern and unwelcoming. They murmured something to each other. Tim jumped up on his feet and sprinted as fast as he could. The two villagers pursued him with their weapons in hand. After a brief sprint, Tim came to a sudden halt at the edge of a cliff. Before him, a waterfall plunged straight down into a large pool below. What now? He wondered as the villagers drew nearer. There was nowhere left to run. Tim glanced down, hesitating in fear. He looked back at the approaching men and considered trying to communicate with them. Perhaps he could explain his dire situation, and they might feel sympathy for him and offer their help. They could give him shelter and food, and assist him in building a boat to return home. But his thoughts were abruptly interrupted when one of the villagers raised his bow and aimed directly at him. With no other choice, Tim jumped. He hit the water hard, nearly reaching the bottom as it wasn't very deep. Fortunately, he managed to avoid the sharp rocks surrounding the pool. The men watched him from above as Tim swiftly climbed out of the water amidst a hail of arrows. Suddenly, the barrage ceased. The villagers turned and ran in another direction. Tim realized they were going to catch up to him soon. He kept running until he found himself deep in the jungle. Tim had no idea where he was heading, but he knew he had to get as far away from those men as possible. He pushed through the dark, increasingly dense jungle. Thick branches and leaves scratched him, leaving cuts all over his arms. The hot, humid air was filled with swarming bugs, which bit his face and ears relentlessly. Tim ran for hours, well into the night. Now it was safe to rest, he thought. He came upon a soft patch near a small pond and lay down on the ground to rest. The mosquitoes continued to swarm, ferociously biting any exposed skin. Having had enough, Tim decided to cover his arms, ears, and face with mud from a nearby pond, a trick he had learned during the war. It worked, and soon he was fast asleep. At sunrise, he began trekking again. Stopping at a gushing stream, he washed off the mud from the night before and filled his bottle with crystal clear water. After taking a few sips, he felt completely refreshed. Just as he finished his drink, he noticed a group of village men on a hill. They were looking for him. He recognized the men who chased him among that group. This time they had more weapons, including large wooden spears. The villagers wanted him dead. They did not want any strangers intruding on their island. Tim slowly gathered his belongings and rushed off. They spotted him from above and the chase ensued. Tim had never run so fast in his life. After a short distance, he saw the blue ocean ahead. He tripped over a small wooden boat, falling hard on his arm. Hearing the men shouting as they drew closer, he noticed two paddles nearby. Struggling to his feet, he grabbed the paddles and dragged the boat over a small stretch of sand and into the water. The men's shouts grew louder as they closed in. Tim leaped into the boat and began paddling vigorously over the waves. Glancing back, he saw one of the men ready to throw a spear. At that moment, Tim dove back into the water and swam under the boat. The spear pierced the surface, narrowly missing him. When Tim came back up for air, he noticed the waves pushed the boat out pretty far from shore. The village men stood still on the beach watching Tim leave, making sure he didn't return. He felt relieved. The chase was over. Tim was happy he escaped the island even though there was more work ahead. He took out a compass from his bag along with a map and tried to find out where he was. Suddenly, he spotted a small plane overhead, flying low enough for him to see its details and color. He recognized it immediately. It belonged to his freight company. They must be out searching for me, Tim thought. Quickly, he pulled out a flare gun and fired it into the air. The blasting echoed as the flare burst, sending smoke billowing skyward. He followed it with another shot, hoping to catch their attention. The aircraft angled its wings and banked towards him, flying directly overhead before circling the small boat. After a few moments, it flew away. Hours later, a large boat appeared on the horizon, heading to him at full speed and swiftly bringing him to safety. Question 1. What was Tim's assignment? A. To deliver parcels. B. To pick up a government official. C. To meet with his Navy friends. Question 2. Where did the plane land? A. On a remote island. B. On the water. C. On the beach. Question 3. What supplies were in the crate? A. Flare guns. B. Drinking water. C. Batteries. D. All of the above. Question 4. Why did the villagers chase after Tim? A. Tim was trying to harm them. B. Tim was intruding on their island. C. Tim took some food from the villagers. Question 5. How did the rescue plane spot Tim? A. Tim waved and shouted to the plane. B. Tim shot a handgun that made a loud noise. C. Tim shot a flare gun that filled the sky with smoke.